Philip, congratulations on the publication of your book. I am so excited to discuss it today with you. You and I are both really interested in the generational shift that is occurring in this country right now. At a time where so much of the focus seems to be on younger generations, what made you want to write something about boomers? Well, I have to say, I appreciate you calling the baby boomers the me generation, because as a millennial, I have been on the other end of receiving the me generation moniker. So I appreciate you pointing that at others. And this metaphor, right, of the snake that swallowed a pig is kind of gross, but very apt. And I will say you were very talented at dealing with metaphors in your book, because you deal with something unpleasant but true, which is that as generations are born, so too must they perish. And I don't think I've ever met somebody who can talk about death with so many metaphors and different ways of sort of talking about it.
Smoothing it out, sure.
Yeah. And so tell us about, in many ways, sort of this cultural, economic power that boomers had, that there's maybe one final act of power left in the boomers' briefcase. And we recently saw House Democratic leadership actually decline in age by a collective 93 years, with former Speaker Pelosi passing the gavel passing the title on to Rep. Hakeem Jeffries and the other three. And so that kind of jump, right? 93 years, almost a century younger in leadership. What does that do for the potential future of Congress, the potential future of policymaking? I love that stat, and my organization, Millennial Action Project, actually recently tracked an increase in the number of young people running for Congress, an increase of 57% this year. We've got 91 millennials and one Gen Zer being sworn in, having just been sworn into Congress. And so we are starting to see sort of an uptick in the number of young people. One of the arguments that you make in the book is how the shifting demographics of our country have actually contributed to this current moment that we're in of toxic political polarization, sort of the role that boomers and now the rising impact of millennials and Gen Z have on sort of that reality of the polarization that we're living in. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? A lot of the ways in which it's difficult to talk about a generation without overgeneralizing, it can be hard to talk about politics at just the national level, right? Sure. And so as we think about some of what you write in your book about the importance of state and local politics, what's happening sort of in our neighborhoods and our communities, where do you see some of the generational impact of boomers sort of paving the way for what the future looks like for civic engagement, our democracy, really starting at the local level? And I think, you talk about zoning, and most people's eyes maybe start to glaze over. It's not the sexiest issue to get engaged around. But your point is that we need to prioritize issues that are reflective of those generations who are coming into power, who are becoming, the dominant generation in the country. And so perhaps sort of making sure that as young people experience these problems, there's folks in positions of political power who can actually prioritize and debate and engage on the topics that matter to a new generation. Yeah, I think that's an important topic to sort of spend a few moments on, because the changing racial demographics of this country are it's so important to acknowledge. They are going to impact every facet of our society. And as somebody who runs an organization of millennials and Gen Zers, it's something that I think is a priority to our generation to really acknowledge in a way that, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, is full of the complexity and nuance that a topic as big as race, deserves. It's not that all people of one certain racial makeup are, all vote the same, all believe the same thing, all earn the same amount of money. And so I do think that sort of to your point of the diversifying nature of our country, creating these really helpful fracture points or diversification opportunities and how we think about what our society has been organized around, how we do things, what is sort of the status quo. Having an introduction of new faces, new centers of power, I think that's a really important thing to discuss. And I just want to commend you for focusing so heavily on it in the book, because it's impossible to talk about the future without sort of underlining the impact that race is going to have on our country. And one argument I would make is that having more young people in elected office can really help to bridge sort of where we're at to where we want to be in terms of just elevating the types of issues that matter to future generations, maybe operating from less of a short-term solution and more of a long-term solution, knowing that the decisions that I as a young policymaker might make are things that I'm going to live to see the consequences of. And so, as we set up a generation of lawmakers to focus on some of the issues that you see as critical to backfilling potentially some of the holes that the baby boomers might leave when they fade. I'm going to need to look at your sort of lexicon of polite ways to say pass away.
As long as you try, I think you get credit for it.
But are there recommendations that you would have, sort of solutions that you think are really important to focus on now in order to set up long-term sort of preparations for our country and for sort of the rising generations? Another anecdote, a young person that I know who had to suspend their campaign because their roommate moved out of their apartment and they got priced out of the district that they were running to represent because they couldn't afford to live alone. And so, yes, to your point, sort of making a bunch of changes to a bunch of different places in order to sort of support this changing landscape of political power, I think is very important.
Or at least having someone in the room who's cognizant of it.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's not even necessarily the case that we need to overhaul everything, but just to have it on people's radar screens is important.
Yeah, and to be somewhat fluent in being able to share experiences. One point that you just mentioned is media consumption and how we have a conversation about what is happening. And it strikes me that, yes, millennials and Gen Zers really came of age in a time where the news and media landscape looks very, very different than how it looked when boomers came of age. And there was a lot more centralization of information and credible ways of disseminating sort of truth. Especially as a journalist, I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of the current media landscape, how we change the conversation or how we have the conversation in order to, stabilize perhaps how we operate from sort of a shared set of facts and truth. Yeah, and I wonder how much, because younger folks have been at the receiving end of so much advertising, right? It's just been like supercharged. How much potentially our own internal BS meters might have become more sophisticated than folks who maybe grew up in the Walter Cronkite era of this is where truth comes from, and sort of an inherent higher level of trust in the information that they're receiving, whether or not millennials and Gen Zers, because we are swimming in just sort of spin and bias, if the next few decades look like us having maybe a more refined ability to discern truth from fiction. Philip, it strikes me, we do often skip over poor Gen X.
Yeah.
What is the role that Gen X has to play in this moment? Or do you see it as sort of matching in power the subsequent generation, millennials or Gen Z? Sort of, where does Gen X fit into all of this for all the Gen X viewers right now? Philip, thank you so much for your time. I recommend everyone read your book. It is informative, it is funny, it is terrific. Philip Bump, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.